427 SOHC Ford, also known as the Camry. You want to know what this thing sounds like? It sounds like a 12-pack of beer cans rumbling around in a dryer machine. America. This thing was a monster. As you can see, it barely fits in this car. This engine is so big, it needed its own zip code. And I went to the post office to check it out. Sure enough, FOMOCO USA. You are here, we are not. So 1964, NASCAR, Ford's looking for something to compete with Dodge's Hemi. So they designed the 427 Camry, overhead cam, 7,000 RPM, 12-to-1 compression, over 600 horse, big block. Race only, never seen a factory production vehicle. And that was NASCAR's issue with it. Before it even entered a race, it was already banned. The cars were already reaching speeds of almost 200 miles an hour, and they really weren't that safe. Basically, a guy by the name of Billy France Jr. said, that's not playing fair, because Chevy's big block in their cars comes in a production vehicle. So does Dodge. So Ford's got this $1 million mountain motor with not much to do with it, except take it to the drag strip, and that's exactly what they did. But although it sounds like the most perfect engine ever, it had two downfalls. The nearly 7 foot long of timing chain, and a block and bottom end that didn't really support anything over 800 horse. They were constantly rebuilding or replacing stuff. 7 feet of timing chain was causing things like 8 degrees of different timing between one cylinder head and the other. That is until some gearhead got with crane cams and designed this gear drive. The Chrysler 413! That's exactly what it's going to feel like after I get done telling you about this engine. A dose of steroids. Now there's two versions. We've got the Wedge and the Max Wedge. Now the 413 Wedge, that engine will put you to sleep. But the 413 Max Wedge, that engine will wake you up in the middle of the night wanting to cook a steak with a side of mashed potatoes and smack your girlfriend on the ass after you're done. This is going to be the most American thing you've seen all day. The standard 413 with a single 4-barrel carburetor made its introduction in 1959. Though this engine needs no introduction at all, and it made 350 horsepower. The Max Wedge comes out in 1962 and with two different versions, one of them being over 410 horsepower with 13-to-1 compression, with a solid lifter camshaft and dual 575 CFM carburetors. Man, what a time to be alive. What are we looking at now? An electric car with fake engine noises? Man, this shit is like going from a real girlfriend to a blow-up doll. Anyways, here's another version of this engine with the cross-ram intake manifold. This cross-ram setup put out 375 horsepower. The 413 wrapped up its reign of terror in 1965. Then the 440 took over in 1966. The Wedge was common in Chrysler's big cars like the Imperial, New Yorker, Newport. The Max Wedge was used in the performance division for the Dodge Darts. If the 426 Hemi is the elephant engine, that would make the 413 a prehistoric woolly mammoth. This intake is bigger than my kitchen table. Those 4-barrel carburetors suck enough airflow to devour 2 plates of Thanksgiving dinner. The 1970 Buick 455 Stage 1. This car was terribly underrated. And I'll tell you why. GM to me is kind of like Mopar. It's always the odd man out. Whereas you have Chevy and Ford always battling it out for the front. Then you have Mopar and GM in the back doing their own thing. And if you're not paying attention, they'll come right by blowing your doors off. 1970, this 455 is in its prime. 10.5-to-1 compression, 750 CFM, 360 horsepower, 510 foot-pounds of torque. Though as always, that horsepower rating is highly arguable and much more likely to be around 400. Spinning out at 5,500 RPM, and there wasn't even a need to rev it that high. Here's why. This big block cubic inch monster was almost as light as the small block Chevy. Look at what we got here, and this is probably a rough estimate. We got the small block Chevy, any standard small block Chevy with a cast iron intake and manifolds, right? At 575 pounds, we got the Buick 455 at 600 pounds. Buick achieved this by making the cylinder walls and the block itself really thin. But that also means it didn't take things like turbochargers, superchargers, bolt-on power adders very well. But back in these days, cubic inches or high RPMs ruled the streets. Nobody gave a flying about power adders. Though it may be unpopular, but don't think for a second you can't build the hell out of these engines with aluminum top ends and stroke bottom ends. Maybe not even necessarily needed. These cars right out of the factory ran a 13.3 quarter-mile time. And you know, on a bias ply tire that was spinning all the way into third gear. All these MFs walking around on TikTok talking about no prep. This was the real no prep, baby. Bias ply tires all the way to the finish line. Yeah, get you some of that. Dodge's 426 Hemi, because you can't spell hemorrhoid without it. And this engine was a total pain in the ass to Chevy and Ford. Infamous Elephant engine, the heavyweight contender, weighing in at 720 pounds, the baddest MF on the planet. So in 1963, Dodge wants to take things to the next level in NASCAR. They come up with the 426 cubic inch hemispherical headed engine. This places spark plugs directly between the valves, directly above the piston. The street application came with 10.2 to 1 compression, hydraulic camshaft, dual 600 CFM carburetors, making it an easy 425 horsepower, almost 500 foot-pounds of torque, and spinning 5,500 RPM. That's just the street version. And here's the race version. Look at the size of that intake. It's bigger than my kitchen table. I don't even have a kitchen table. I sleep in a race car, remember? So in NASCAR, this took the cars from 163 mile an hour cars to 180. So opening day of NASCAR 1964, Dodge had strict orders for every Mopar driver on the track. They were not allowed to run the race at full throttle speed. They wanted to keep their lap times just above what Ford was capable of at the time. That meant keeping the throttle at about 85%. Now under NASCAR specs, this engine made about 750 horsepower, had about 12.5 to 1 compression, and ran at about 7,000 RPM all race long. And that got the attention of drag racers. I remember when I was a kid, anytime I heard the word Hemi, I would always just imagine at the drag strip a car doing a wheelie about 6 feet in the air. Mopar. The 500 horse Race Saver 305. This ain't your granddad's 85 Caprice 305, sonny. This is the real deal Holyfield, bitch. Now, I'm not necessarily directing that last phrase at anyone in particular. It's just that this is the Mighty Mouse small block, baby. This engine was specifically designed for sprint car racing. Sprint cars are divided into 3 classes by cubic inch rules: 305, 360, and 410. 305 Race Saver class was designed to be cost effective because a naturally aspirated 950 horse 410 out of Speedway Motors is $50,000. This is a spec class engine, so that means it has some restriction. You can use a factory stock block or you can go with a dart. The factory stock block is a little lighter, but the aftermarket dart block is a little stronger. It's going to last a little longer. Flat top pistons with your choice of solid lift mechanical camshaft with around 510 lift. These spec'd out cylinder heads made specifically for this class come with a serial number, 70cc chambers, 194 intake valves, aluminum heads with a compression ratio around 10.2 to 1, topped off with a mechanical fuel injection unit, though some of your lower buck tracks will still use a carburetor. If the 305 small block Chevy can make a name for itself in a class like sprint car racing, then it's an engine that deserves some recognition. The 305's potential doesn't just stop there. You could go higher compression, more camshaft. You could do 11.5 to 1 compression with aluminum heads and run it on an E85. Now you got even more torque, because the 305 is known not to have as much torque as a 350. But the facts are there, the horsepower's there, the RPMs are there. The only thing that's missing on this engine is people's knowledge of it with their limited point of view. Don't let people that use a snap-on scanner to assist them when working on their own car tell you what kind of engine to build or what to do with it. Like I said in my 307 video, it's a small block Chevy. It's only limited to what you can do with it. With more camshaft and compression, you can make 550, 600, 600 plus horsepower with the 305 small block Chevy. The choice is yours. The 1957 Chevrolet 283 Fuelie. First ever engine to make 1 horsepower per cubic inch. 283 cubic inches, was rated at 283 horsepower. Not only equipped in Chevy's Corvette at the time, but also the Bel Air. This engine came out with 3 different versions. That's why some people were believing the 1961 409 Chevy Big Block was actually the first 1 horsepower per cubic inch engine. But if you're talking just carburation, yes, that would still be correct. But in 1957, the 283 came 3 ways. 1 4-barrel carburetor, 2 4-barrel carburetors, and fuel injection. All with 3 different rated horsepowers, of course. The fuel-injected 283 of 1957 was rated at 283 horsepower to match the cubic inches. But I'd honestly believe it probably made 290. They just said 283 so that it matched the cubic inches. The dual 4-barrel setup 283 made 270 horsepower. 13 horsepower less than the cubic inches. So that's where the confusion is. Did this engine make that horsepower or did it not? It did with the fuel injection, it didn't with the carburation. And the smaller cam motor 283 made 220 horsepower with 1 4-barrel carburetor. Anyways, check out the cutout on this 283 that I found. Look at the detail on it. You can see the pop-up pistons there, the aluminum valve covers, the way the intake is set up, the mechanical fuel injection. Man, that's pretty sweet. The fuel-injected 283 and the dual 4-barrel carburetor 283 were the same engine. The only difference was the fuel injection versus the carburation. And even in today's engines, carburation versus fuel injection is worth about 10 to 15 horsepower. They both had the same Duntov camshaft. Solid lifter cam, good to 7,000 RPM. Both with 10.5 to 1 compression. Mechanical fuel injection, new age technology for its time. These fuel-injected 283s were getting about 20 miles to the gallon on the highway. In the 1950s, that was phenomenal. With the maintenance required and the failure rate, it just did not stand the test of time. They went right back to carburetor after this. You gotta understand, this is post-World War II. This is the 1950s in America. People were making fun of people that bought the Corvette and the Bel Air with this fuel-injected 283. But who's laughing now? Just me. I'm the one still using a carburetor today. These units were used by Rochester, the same company that GM used for its carburetors. It's such a simple theory, I'm really not sure why it didn't work out for Chevy, other than the fact that everybody that was around at the time never learned about it in their auto shop class when they went to high school. But honestly, who the fuck finished high school back then? The 283 small block Chevy, was this the original Mouse House, or was that the DZ302? Now, if I see enough comments posted about what's a Mouse House, I guess I'll just do a video on Mouse House small blocks and rat-infested big blocks. The Dodge R5 P7. This thing sounds better than my girlfriend when she's about to hit high RPM. That's got me thinking they must be identical twins, because when they blow a rod, they both cost you a lot of money. Guys, this could be a very streetable engine, although it's made for high RPM. Less than 12 to 1 compression, 58cc heads, and 2.1 intake valves. Man, backed by a manual trans and a 456 rear end, this is a very streetable engine. Man, that means you could run this nugget on E85, no problem. These kits come at 358s, 365s, race car shit. The 1968 Ford Mega Power big blocks. The year the 429 and the 460 came out and joined forces.
Mega, yeah, the mega power, yeah. Mega powers, yeah! I feel the power now. I feel the power.
Just kind of a little worried about locking up here.
It's all right.
Because we just might blow the whole planet up, you know.
429 came present in the Ford Thunderbird, making an underrated 360 horsepower with just under 10.5 to 1 compression. It's all right! Well, the difference between a stock 429 and the Cobra Jet is just induction. Bigger carburetor, bigger ports, bigger valves, and 11.3 to 1 compression. The Cobra Jet, yeah. And allow me, yeah, to tell you about this engine. 1 cubic inch at a time, yeah. 11 to 1 compression, yeah. Rated at 375 horsepower, man. That to me just sounds like madness. I'm gonna go out on a limb here, yeah. That the 429 Cobra Jet made 450 factory horsepower, yeah. That sounds right! Now, I don't know if anybody actually liked this video. This is just what happens when I start goofing off. Could be the glasses, could be the do-rag, could be just the fact that I was born in the 80s and I've never left.